Ladies and gentlemen, I think we are seeing a massive short squeeze that is happening right now. What I'm talking about is Bitcoin, which is still the driver of this crypto markets. You should definitely be paying attention to Bitcoin because if it has more room to pump, that's going to be very good for your altcoins. And if it dumps, that's going to be very bad for your altcoins. And what we're seeing with Bitcoin right here, right now, is that the bears actually try to break down from this rising wedge pattern. This is the weekly time frame. I've been talking about this pattern forever because it's got a very steep breakdown target to below 80k. Okay, and as of last week's weekly candle close, it looked like there was a fake out for the bears. That's basically when you see a wicking back up into the pattern here when they had last week to try to break down from this bearish pattern. Now we are seeing this weekly candle close ending up back within this pattern here. What could this mean for the bulls? Would this mean that this is going to be breaking out of this bearish pattern, this rising wedge to the upside? Not necessarily, okay? Even though there is a short squeeze right now, which is basically where the short sellers are trapped, right? Because they played it by the book. They thought the rising wedge was going to break down, which is reasonable, right? It has a higher probability of breaking down. However, it was not successful. And a lot of these short sellers are trapped and they're basically covering their positions right now. That's why you're seeing the increase in buying pressure. Now, we're going to take a look into what some scenarios are from within the pattern to give us more clue on what the next moves could be. We're also going to be taking a look into some major economics, cryptos news before the charts, and going to be taking a look into a few altcoin setups, which includes BitTorrent coin, which is BTCC or BTTC, BTTC, Scale Network, which is SKL, and what is the third one? It's going to be Meme Coin, Meme USDT. So let's see what's happening in these markets, what their updated setups and price targets are, if anything has changed. We're going to take a look into the news first before diving into the charts. So let's go ahead and do that. All right, first piece here is by You Today. And this is saying Bitcoin going to crash, US dollar and index hint at a move up. So let's go ahead and take a look into the Dixie, which is DXY, which I don't really keep track of the DXY because I know that a lot of people say that there are a little bit of there's a lot of correlation between the DXY and Bitcoin, but I just don't see it, right? I mean, maybe on a longer term level, there is. I don't doubt that, right? On a higher term, on a higher time frame, but when it comes to trading my positions and how I trade, I don't really see how the Dixie is too useful. That's relative to how I'm trading. Okay, I use the S&P 500 as a front running signal because that has more correlation with Bitcoin, and of course that drives the crypto markets. So this is not something I use too much, the DXY, but what the author is saying here is that this pattern here, this is the monthly time frame, could be hinting at um Bitcoin moving upwards. Now, this is a falling wedge pattern, okay? Falling wedges has a higher chance of breaking to the upside, and DXY is currently near the bottom of this falling wedge pattern. So, in a sense, it doesn't really hint to me that this is going to be a negative correlation with Bitcoin at the time being, because it is at the bottom of the falling wedge pattern. Unless this thing breaks down, then yes, but the probability of this pattern is a higher chance of breaking to the upside. All right, let's go to the next piece here is by News BTC. Bitcoin could go to zero, hedge fund CEO says. I've been hearing this since the time I got into Bitcoin. This is nothing new. From Peter Schiff to others, there's always going to be skeptics for every industry. So, I mean, I'm not really worried about what some of these people have to say. Bitcoin going to zero. So, next piece, okay. Next piece is by Cointelegraph. Bitcoin traders see 100K CME gap dip next as Bitcoin price gains 1.5%. I do think that 110K could be a possible retest, right? I mean, I wouldn't completely rule that out yet. And I'll show you guys why later on the charts. Even though we're seeing a very good day here, there's still a chance that we go back to some of those lower levels. But 110K in that range seems to be very good support. Okay, and I'll point out to you guys why in just a second. All right, next piece is also by Cointelegraph, which says crypto funds bleed 812 million, but Solana bucks the trend with gains. Okay, so we are seeing some bounce back here from some altcoins. Total 3 hasn't really responded yet, but I still do think that we're early, very early in this bull cycle here. I know that there are people saying that this is almost at the end of the bull cycle. I don't think so for a few reasons. One of which is that the Federal Reserve has just started its Fed rate cut cycle. We're still looking very early for Bitcoin on the monthly time frame in terms of monthly RSI, right? So those are my two main arguments that that we're still early in this bull cycle. But of course, I am long on Bitcoin. I am long on quite a bit of the altcoins here. So my opinions on this market is bullish. But these are just my opinions, like the entirety of this video, and it's not financial advice. You have to do your own research and all that good stuff, okay? All right, next piece here is going to be by, sorry, did I, yeah, I covered this. Next piece here is by a trader in sharing his ideas on trading views. So it says Bitcoin at a critical juncture, bulls defending major zone. Okay, so he has this chart charted out like this, the daily time frame, and he has the chart basically saying that Bitcoin was at a critical support level where the black line is, this critical zone, right? And he is saying, based on his chart here, that this could bounce all the way up to 140K almost, which yeah, I think that's very possible. So yeah, I mean, without getting too much into this chart here, so I mean, I agree with this charts. Not, I mean, not in every detail, but I do agree with the 140K target. I think that's going to be very achievable for Bitcoin in the near future. All right, let's come back here to the Bitcoin chart. This is the weekly time frame. Okay, weekly time frame. We have a green candle showing up back into the bearish pattern here after a wick, right? The bears have basically been trapped and it's increasing the buying pressure here. So we have a huge monthly candle close that's coming tomorrow. That's something to be paying attention to. But let's kind of zoom into the daily time frame here and see what I'm seeing. Daily time frame, I mentioned that there was a falling wedge scenario here. So Bitcoin could still get rejected at this upward trend line. It could still potentially, the bears could still potentially break down from that bearish rising wedge. Okay, just because we're seeing a short squeeze right now does not mean that this rising wedge breakdown is over. They could attempt it again. What I would say is that if the bulls are actually able to break above this upward trend line here, that would significantly increase the probability that the bulls could be taking another swing at breaking out of this bearish pattern here, right? So until then, I think we're still waiting for a resolution here. So even though the short squeeze right now is looking good for the bulls, um, I would say that the probability of the bears actually having lost this attempt to break down would not be valid just yet until the bulls break out of this upward trend line here of this daily time frame possible falling wedge scenario. Otherwise, otherwise the price action could still come down to the daily 200 SMA, right? The orange line here that's currently at about almost 105K now. Now, I also did say that 110K is still in the cards because if the bulls get a rejection here, right, it could still come back down to this previous low at about 109K, right? But it is very likely that there's going to be a bullish divergence scenario if it does that. Okay. I also want to mention that on the weekly time frame, there is still higher highs and higher lows, right? Since this bounce here at about 107.5K, right? We're still seeing higher highs and higher lows since that bottom. And very subtle here is that the last week's weekly candle close, even though it ended up in a red candle, it has not retraced that entire pump that we saw back on the week of September 8th, which is still looking very bullish to me, okay? Because we're still seeing higher highs and higher lows, and it has not retraced that pump, okay? Very subtle. Let's go ahead and go to some altcoin setups now and see what's happening with BTTC, which is BitTorrent coin. What is happening with BTTC here? So I've talked about this quite some time ago. I think a lot of these patterns are still valid because altcoins have just been either moving very slow or they have still been getting beat down, right? So this is BTTC on the weekly time frame. Huge falling wedge pattern, still valid. I think this is probably valid on a lower time frame where I can see three candles at least on the upward trend line, right? And the price target for BTTC here, price target would be a bunch of zeros and 30, okay? So that looks like it's going to be quite a bit of a multiple here for BTTC. However, price targets are estimates only. A lot of it is going to depend on what happens with Bitcoin. If Bitcoin starts dumping, especially extensively, a lot of these altcoin setups are not going to matter very much. So gotta pay attention to Bitcoin. Now, from within the bigger falling wedge pattern, BTTC did break out of a smaller falling wedge pattern here on the week of April 21st, and the price target for this one still has not yet been met. It's going to be a bunch of zeros and 120, okay? And since the breakout there, it has not met that price target. It has also formed a smaller falling wedge pattern here. And if it breaks out by this point here, for example, price target would be about a bunch of zeros and 80, okay? So this is basically what I'm seeing for BTTC. And let's go ahead and go to Scale Network, SKL, see what's happening with this coin here. Now, if you guys start charting your patterns, you're gonna find a very similar theme, which is basically you're gonna see a bunch of falling wedges. Why is that important to spot? Because it gives you much lower risk entries comparing to chasing pumps on the day of, especially breakouts on the day of. Okay, I like finding falling wedge patterns because they also have a higher chance of breaking to the upside. Right, if I am looking to long. If I'm looking to short, then I'm looking for rising wedge patterns, right? So this is on the weekly time frame for SKL, and it broke out on the week of August 11th. This breakout is still valid. Price target would be about almost 14 cents, okay? Since the breakout, SKL has just been gliding along this upward trend line of the falling wedge pattern it has broken out of. This breakout is still valid because you don't see a candle close back within the pattern yet, okay? That's not uncommon to see a breakout of a falling wedge pattern and it forms another falling wedge pattern here. I do want to mention that since last time, I have invalidated that falling wedge pattern I talked about on the daily time frame because price action has basically broken below that pattern, right? So what I'm seeing here is more noticeable on the 12-hour time frame, right? On the 12-hour time frame, there is a smaller falling wedge pattern here that is in play. And if it breaks out by this point here, the price target would be about 3.7 cents almost. Now, falling wedges, you have to mind the probabilities because nothing in this market is 100%, okay? Um, any pattern here, they're going to have a higher probability of going in one direction, but you also have to mind the probability of the downside probability of it breaking down in the other direction as well, right? So I've seen falling wedges break down. I've seen price targets not met. I've seen fake outs through my 5+ years of trading. Okay, so let me tell you. So this is SKL, and the price target here, yeah, like I said, I mentioned it, is about 3.7 cents if it breaks out by this point. For example, let's go ahead and go to meme coin, which is meme USDT. All right, for meme coin here, I talked about this falling wedge pattern as well, weekly time frame, and the price target for this breakout here would be about 2.7 cents price target, which is huge. That is a 10x, right? Could it actually get there? We will see, right? Let's take so after it has broken out that huge falling wedge pattern here, let's take a look into the daily time frame. Daily time frame falling wedge pattern, okay, price target, if it breaks out by this point, for example, price target would be about 0.4 cents almost. So that is still a pretty big move. A lot of it is going to depend on Bitcoin, okay? You want to be rooting for Bitcoin. You want to be paying attention to Bitcoin. I never trade altcoins without a clear understanding of Bitcoin first. So this basically wraps it up for some of these coins for today. Let me know if you guys want to continue seeing meme coin, SKL, BTTC, or any other coins in this market by dropping a like, comment, subscribe. I'll pick a request to do for you guys on a daily basis. I'll see you on the next one.